A tempest rages over the rugged Brittany coast, where Hercule Poirot arrives at the eerie Château des Vagues to unravel a chilling mystery. When Madame Fournier is found dead in a locked library, stabbed with a jeweled dagger, secrets swirl among the suspects. A passionate artist, a secretive solicitor, a resentful housekeeper, and a brooding groundskeeper. Hidden passages, planted clues, and buried grudges lead Poirot through a maze of deception. In just 30 seconds, dive into a world of stormy intrigue where only Poirot's brilliant mind can unveil the killer before the tide turns. Chapter 1. The Tempest's Call. The wind tore across the Brittany coast with a ferocity that seemed to challenge the very cliffs of Saint-Malo. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the town's ancient ramparts, his small, fastidious figure dwarfed by the roiling sea below. His overcoat, meticulously chosen for its warmth and elegance, flapped about him, and he clutched his hat to keep it from the greedy gusts. His mustache, that paragon of grooming, quivered under the assault of salty spray. Yet his sharp green eyes remained fixed on the horizon, where storm clouds churned like a cauldron of ill omen. He had arrived in this remote corner of France not for leisure, non, jamais, but at the urgent summons of Madame Héloise Fournier, a widow of considerable wealth whose letter had reached him in London. Her words, scrawled in a hand that betrayed both elegance and unease, spoke of a darkness. Within her household at Château des Vagues, a foreboding estate perched precariously above the Atlantic's wrath. Poirot, ever attuned to the mysteries of the human heart, could not resist such a call. The journey to the chateau was arduous, the hired car rattling along narrow roads, slick with rain. As the vehicle climbed the winding path, lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the estate's silhouette, turrets sharp as accusations, windows like unblinking eyes. At one such window, Poirot glimpsed a figure, motionless, its outline stark against the flickering light. "Curieux," he murmured, his mind already sifting possibilities. Was it a watcher, or merely a trick of the storm? The chateau's heavy oak door creaked open to reveal Madame Fournier herself, a slight woman of 60, whose delicate frame seemed at odds with the grandeur of her home. Her silver hair was pinned with precision, but her eyes darted like minnows, betraying a nervous agitation. She welcomed Poirot with a strained smile, her voice soft yet tremulous. "Monsieur Poirot, I am so grateful you have come. This house, it is not at peace." She led him into a cavernous hall, its walls adorned with ancestral portraits whose stern gazes seemed to follow his every step. Over a dinner of sole meunière and crisp chablis, Poirot met the household. Mademoiselle Claire Dubois, Madame Fournier's niece, was a striking young woman of 28, her auburn hair tumbling in defiance of the evening's formality. An artist, she spoke passionately of capturing the sea's moods on canvas, her eyes alight with a fervor that Poirot noted as both genuine and guarded. Monsieur Roland Berger, the family solicitor, was a man of middle years, his thin lips and wire-rimmed spectacles lending him an air of perpetual calculation. He spoke little, his responses clipped, as if each word were a coin reluctantly spent. Madame Hélène Marchand, the housekeeper, was a wiry woman with a face etched by years of service, her sharp tongue barely softened by deference. Lastly, Jacques Leroux, the groundskeeper, was a broad-shouldered youth whose dark eyes smoldered with an intensity that clashed with his subservient role. The meal was punctuated by the storm's relentless clamor, thunder rolling like artillery, rain lashing the tall windows. Conversation faltered, each guest retreating into private thoughts, and Poirot observed the subtle tensions. Claire's fleeting frown at her aunt's mention of her frivolous art, Roland's stiff nod when finances were alluded to, Hélène's pursed lips at a request for more wine, Jacques' clenched fist beneath the table. As the clock struck 10, Madame Fournier rose, pleading fatigue. "The storm unsettles me," she said, her voice barely audible above the gale. "We shall speak tomorrow, Monsieur Poirot." The others dispersed, leaving Poirot to retire to his guest room, a chamber of faded opulence with a four-poster bed and a view of the turbulent sea. He arranged his toiletries with precision, his mind cataloguing the evening's impressions. The chateau, he sensed, was a stage, its players bound by unseen scripts of envy, fear, or ambition. Scarcely had he settled when a scream shattered the night, high and piercing, cutting through the storm's roar. Poirot, with the agility of a man half his age, seized his dressing gown and hastened down the corridor. The sound led him to the library, a vast room lined with leather-bound volumes and lit by a single chandelier. There, illuminated by a flash of lightning, lay Madame Héloise Fournier, her silk gown stained crimson. A jeweled dagger, its hilt glinting with cruel beauty, protruded from her chest. The window stood ajar, rain pooling on the sill, but the room bore no other sign of disturbance, no footprints, no overturned furniture. The key to the locked door rested in the folds of her dress. Poirot knelt, his fingers hovering over the scene, his mind a whirl of order and method. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, "the storm has claimed its first victim, but it is not the storm that wields the knife." He rose, his gaze sweeping the room, already seeking the threads of deceit woven into this tableau of death. The gray cells, as he called them, were awake, and Hercule Poirot knew that the mystery of Château des Vagues had only begun. Chapter 2. The Locked Room. The dawn broke over Saint-Malo with a sullen reluctance, the storm's fury having spent itself in the night, leaving a sky bruised with purple clouds. The sea, though calmer, still muttered against the cliffs, as if whispering secrets of the tragedy at Château des Vagues. Hercule Poirot stood in the library where Madame Héloise Fournier's body had been discovered mere hours before, his small, meticulous figure a stark contrast to the room's grandeur. The chandelier's light caught the dust motes drifting in the air, and the heavy scent of old books mingled with a faint tang of blood. The jeweled dagger, now removed by the authorities, had left an indelible mark on Poirot's mind, a weapon of beauty turned to malice. The window, still ajar, admitted a chill breeze, but the rain-soaked sill offered no clues. The door, locked from within and its key found in the victim's pocket, posed a puzzle that intrigued Poirot's orderly intellect. "A locked room," he murmured, stroking his mustache, "is never so simple as it appears." Inspector Giraud arrived shortly after breakfast, his heavy boots echoing through the chateau's halls. A man of robust build and brusque demeanor, he carried the air of one who trusted facts over fancies. His mustache, less disciplined than Poirot's, bristled as he surveyed the scene. "A clear case, Monsieur Poirot," he declared, his voice tinged with the confidence of a man who preferred straight lines to subtleties. "A thief, caught in the act by Madame Fournier, panicked and struck her down. The storm provided cover for his escape." He gestured to the open window, as if the solution were as plain as the cliffs beyond. Poirot tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with polite skepticism. "A thief, you say, Inspector? Yet the dagger is no common blade. It is a family heirloom, kept in a glass case in this very room. Would a thief, in such haste, choose so conspicuous a weapon?" Giraud frowned, unaccustomed to contradiction, but Poirot pressed on. "And the door, locked from within, with the key in Madame's possession. How does your thief depart without disturbing this delicate arrangement?" Giraud's jaw tightened. "He climbed out the window, perhaps, and pulled it shut behind him. The wind did the rest." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone as smooth as polished marble. "But the earth outside is sodden from the storm, yet there are no footprints beneath the window. No, Inspector, the solution lies not in the wind, but in the mind that planned this crime." He turned to the display case, its glass unmarred, the lock intact. The dagger's absence was the only evidence of tampering, yet even this was precise. No scratches, no forced entry. The murderer, Poirot mused aloud, knew this house, its treasures, and its secrets. The household, summoned to the drawing room, presented a tableau of grief and suspicion. Claire Dubois, her auburn hair pulled back in a hasty bun, clutched a handkerchief, her eyes red but wary. Roland Berger, the solicitor, sat, stiffly, his fingers drumming a silent rhythm on his knee. Hélène Marchand, the housekeeper, stood near the door, her expression a mask of stoic efficiency, though her hands twisted in her apron. Jacques Leroux, the groundskeeper, leaned against the wall, his dark gaze flickering between defiance and unease. Poirot, standing before the fireplace, observed them all, his gray cells attuned to the nuances of their behavior. "Mademoiselle Dubois," he began, addressing Claire, "you were in your studio last night, painting, were you not?" His voice was gentle, but his eyes missed nothing. Claire nodded, her voice catching. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. The storm, it inspires me. The way the sea churns, the colors of the sky. I was working on a new piece." Her fingers brushed a smudge of paint on her sleeve. Vermilion, Poirot noted, a vivid hue that seemed to pulse with her intensity. "And you heard nothing? No scream? No footsteps?" Poirot's tone remained mild, but his question was a probe. "Nothing," Claire said, her eyes meeting his briefly before dropping. "The storm was so loud, and my studio is in the attic. I was absorbed." Poirot turned to Roland. "Monsieur Berger, you were in your room, reviewing documents, oui?" Roland adjusted his spectacles, his voice measured. "Correct. I was preparing a report on the estate's finances. Madame Fournier had requested it." His lips thinned, as if the memory of her request carried a weight he preferred not to share. "And you, Madame Marchand?" Poirot's gaze shifted to the housekeeper, who straightened under his scrutiny. "I was in the pantry, polishing silver," Hélène said sharply. "The storm made a mess of the dining room, and I had work to do. I heard nothing until Mademoiselle Claire's scream." Poirot's eyes lingered on her, noting the faint tremor in her hands. "And Monsieur Leroux?" Jacques shifted, his broad shoulders tensing. "I was in the stables, securing the horses. The wind was tearing at the doors. I didn't hear anything until I came back to the house." Each alibi was plausible, yet Poirot sensed a discord, a subtle misalignment in their accounts. He dismissed them with a courteous nod, his mind already turning to the library's secrets. Returning to the scene, he examined the room with meticulous care. The rug, stained with Madame Fournier's blood, bore no other marks, no scuffs, no signs of struggle. The bookshelves, laden with tomes, stood undisturbed. The window's latch was secure, its frame unscarred. Poirot knelt by the display case, his fingers tracing its edges. The lock, a delicate mechanism, showed no signs of tampering. "Curieux," he said softly. The dagger was taken with care, as if by one who knew its place. He stepped to the window, peering at the cliff's edge below. The ground, churned by rain, was a quagmire, yet no footprints marred its surface. He closed his eyes, visualizing the storms, chaos, the wind, the rain, the darkness. A thief, as Giraud suggested, would have left traces, however faint. No, this was no outsider's work. The murderer was within these walls, their movements cloaked by the storm's tumult. Poirot's attention returned to the door. The key, found in Madame Fournier's pocket, was unremarkable, its brass gleaming dully. He tested the lock, its mechanism smooth and precise. The door was locked, he murmured, but by whom, and why? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as he paced the room, his mind sifting through possibilities. The scream, Claire's discovery, the dagger's placement, all were pieces of a puzzle, each edge sharp with intent. As he left the library, Poirot paused at the threshold, his gaze sweeping the room once more. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in the chateau's shadows. "The truth," he said to himself, "is like the tide. It recedes, but it always returns." He straightened his coat, his resolve as firm as the cliffs outside. The locked room was a challenge, but Hercule Poirot was no stranger to locked hearts, and he would unlock this mystery with the precision of his gray cells. Chapter 3. Shadows of Motive. The morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of Chateau des Vagues, casting a pallid glow over the drawing room where Hercule Poirot had assembled the household. The air was thick with unspoken tensions, the memory of Madame Eloise Fournier's death hanging like a fog over the cliffs outside. Poirot stood before the marble fireplace, its unlit hearth a cold mirror to the mood. His small, immaculate figure commanded attention, his green eyes darting from face to face, reading the silent language of guilt, fear, and secrecy. The storm had passed, but its aftermath left the chateau's inhabitants exposed, their facades as brittle as the weathered stones of Saint-Malo. Poirot began with a deliberate calm, his voice a precise instrument. "Mesdames et messieurs, a crime has been committed, not by chance, but by design. To uncover the truth, we must look to the heart, where motives grow like shadows." He paused, letting the words settle, his mustache twitching slightly as he observed the effect. Claire Dubois sat on a velvet settee, her artist's hands folded tightly, her auburn curls catching the light like a halo tinged with unease. Roland Berger, the solicitor, perched on a chair, his fingers adjusting his spectacles with mechanical precision. Hélène Marchand stood near a sideboard, her sharp features set in a mask of deference that did not quite conceal her wariness. Jacques Leroux, the groundskeeper, leaned against a bookcase, his broad frame taut, his eyes fixed on a point beyond the room. "Mademoiselle Dubois," Poirot said, turning to Claire, "your aunt, Madame Fournier, was a woman of strong opinions, was she not? Perhaps she did not always approve of your artistic pursuits." His tone was gentle, but the question was a scalpel. Claire's lips parted, a flush rising to her cheeks. She thought my painting frivolous. Yes, she wanted me to marry well, to secure the family's legacy. But I loved her, Monsieur Poirot. I would never. Her voice broke, and she looked away, her fingers twisting the edge of her shawl. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And yet, love does not preclude resentment, mademoiselle. He turned to Roland. Monsieur Berger, as solicitor, you managed Madame Fournier's affairs. Were there complications in her estate? Roland's thin lips tightened, his voice clipped. The estate is complex, Monsieur Poirot. Investments, properties, such matters require care. Madame Fournier was exacting, but I served her faithfully. His eyes flickered, a brief shadow crossing his face, and Poirot noted the hesitation, as if words were being weighed before release. Madame Marchand, Poirot continued, his gaze shifting to the housekeeper. You have served this family for many years. Such loyalty is admirable, yet it must have come at a cost. Did Madame Fournier's demands ever weigh heavily? Hélène's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp as a winter wind. I did my duty, monsieur. She was a difficult mistress, always finding fault, but I managed. Servants don't kill over harsh words. Her hands, however, betrayed her, clenching the cloth she held until her knuckles whitened. Poirot's attention settled on Jacques, whose brooding presence seemed to absorb the room's light. Monsieur Leroux, you spoke little at dinner, yet I sense a history with Madame Fournier. Your father, I understand, was once groundskeeper here. His departure was abrupt? Jacques' jaw tightened, his voice low but edged with bitterness. She dismissed him years ago, accused him of theft. It broke him. He died a year later. She never apologized. His fists curled, and Poirot noted the raw strength in his frame, capable of wielding a dagger with ease. Merci, Poirot said, dismissing them with a wave. I shall reflect on your words. As the household dispersed, he stepped onto the terrace, the sea's restless murmur a counterpoint to his thoughts. The cliffs, jagged and unyielding, stretched toward the horizon, and Poirot's mind turned to the tangible traces of the crime. He retraced his steps to the chateau's grounds, his polished shoes navigating the damp paths with care. Near a rose garden, half wild from neglect, he spotted a curious detail. A scrap of blue fabric caught on a thorn bush, its hue vivid against the gray morning. He plucked it free, noting its texture. A painter's smock, perhaps, like those Claire wore. Yet the bush was far from her studio, near a path leading to the cliffs. Returning to the library, Poirot examined the scene anew. The blood-stained rug had been removed by Inspector Giraud's men, but the room's stillness preserved its secrets. He knelt by the display case, his fingers tracing the dagger's empty velvet bed. A faint smudge caught his eye, not on the case, but on a nearby table, where a book had been displaced. It was vermilion paint, bold and unmistakable, the same shade Claire used in her seascapes. Poirot's gray cells hummed. "Interessant," he murmured. "A clue or a deception?" He visited Claire's attic studio, a chaos of canvases and pigments. Her latest work, a stormy seascape, was vibrant with vermilion and cobalt, its wet surface suggesting recent effort. Yet the floorboards creaked loudly underfoot, as she had claimed, and a servant confirmed no such sound had echoed during the murder's hour. Could Claire have slipped out unnoticed? Poirot tested the window, its latch stiff from disuse, ruling out an exit to the grounds. The fabric, then, was an anomaly, perhaps placed to mislead. He sought Roland next, finding him in a study cluttered with ledgers. "Monsieur Berger," Poirot said, "Madame Fournier's will. Who benefits?" Roland hesitated, then admitted Claire was the primary heir, with modest sums for himself and Hélène. Jacques, notably, was excluded. "She never trusted him," Roland added, his voice low. "After his father's disgrace, she kept him on out of pity, nothing more." Poirot's final stop was the stables, where Jacques was mending a gate. The groundskeeper's hands, calloused and strong, paused at Poirot's approach. "You think I killed her?" Jacques said, his tone defiant. "I hated her, yes, but I'm no murderer." Poirot studied him, noting the mud on his boots, dried, not fresh, suggesting he hadn't roamed the grounds during the storm. As evening fell, Poirot stood alone on the cliffs, the sea's rhythm steadying his thoughts. The blue fabric, the vermilion smudge, the locked door, each was a thread in a tapestry of deceit. The motives were clear. Claire's stifled ambitions, Roland's financial pressures, Hélène's suppressed resentment, Jacques's inherited grudge, yet none aligned perfectly with the crime's precision. The shadows of motive, Poirot mused, obscure the light of truth, but Hercule Poirot shall find it. He turned back to the chateau, its lights flickering like eyes in the dusk. The puzzle was complex, but his method was sure. The killer had left traces, however subtle, and Poirot's gray cells were already weaving them into a pattern that would reveal the hand behind the dagger. Chapter 4. The Hidden Passage. The Château des Vagues seemed to crouch under the weight of its secrets, its stone walls absorbing the faint sunlight that pierced the morning clouds. Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes clicking softly on the parquet, moved through the corridors with the precision of a metronome, his mind a whirl of deductions. The murder of Madame Héloise Fournier, with its locked door and jeweled dagger, was a puzzle of exquisite intricacy, and Poirot relished the challenge. The blue fabric, the vermilion smudge, and the alibis of the household had stirred his gray cells, but he sensed the truth lay deeper, hidden in the very bones of the chateau itself. A chance remark by Hélène Marchand, let slip over a second glass of cognac the previous evening, had ignited his curiosity. Tales of smugglers' passages woven into the estate's ancient foundations, used centuries ago to evade the king's taxman. Poirot returned to the library, where the air still carried the faint echo of tragedy. The blood-stained rug was gone, replaced by a pristine expanse of oak, but the room's atmosphere remained heavy. He circled the space, his eyes tracing the ornate paneling that lined the walls, its carvings depicting ships and sea, creatures in a style both grand and secretive. His fingers, gloved to preserve any trace, pressed gently against the wood, seeking irregularities. Near a towering bookcase, he felt a subtle give, a panel that yielded with a soft click. The bookcase swung inward, revealing a narrow passage, its stone walls slick with damp and cloaked in shadow. A draught, cold as the cliffs outside, brushed his face. "Voilà," Poirot murmured, his mustache twitching with satisfaction. "The chateau keeps its secrets, but not from Hercule Poirot." Armed with a small flashlight, he ventured into the tunnel. The air was musty, thick with the scent of earth and salt, and the passage sloped downward, twisting toward the cliffs. Cobwebs clung to the walls, undisturbed for years, yet Poirot's sharp eyes caught a single anomaly. A footprint in the dust, broad and deep, pressed into the stone floor near the tunnel's end. It emerged at a concealed exit, hidden behind gorse bushes on the cliff's edge, where the sea roared below. The print was fresh, its edges crisp, suggesting passage within days. Poirot measured it carefully, noting its size. Too large for Claire's delicate feet, too deliberate for a casual wanderer. "Interessant," he said, pocketing a sketch of the print. Yet the tunnel's floor, beyond this mark, was dry, untouched by the storm's rain. How had the murderer entered the library without leaving a trail of mud? Back in the chateau, Poirot sought Jacques Leroux, whose heavy boots and brooding demeanor made him a likely candidate for the footprint. He found the groundskeeper in the stables, sharpening a scythe with slow, deliberate strokes. "Monsieur Leroux," Poirot began, his tone disarming. "You know this estate well, do you not? Its paths, its hidden ways?" Jacques paused, his dark eyes narrowing. "What are you getting at, monsieur?" Poirot produced the sketch, holding it with the precision of a jeweler displaying a gem. "A footprint found in a passage beneath the chateau. It matches the size of your boots, I think." He watched Jacques closely, noting the flicker of surprise, quickly masked. "I know the passage," Jacques admitted, his voice gruff. "Found it as a boy, playing on the cliffs, but I haven't been there in years. Not since—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "Since your father's dismissal?" Poirot prompted, his voice soft but insistent. Jacques nodded, his hands gripping the scythe. "Madame Fournier caught me exploring it once. She forbade me to return, said it was dangerous." His tone carried a bitter edge, and Poirot noted the strength in his grip, capable of far more than sharpening tools. "And yet," Poirot said, "a footprint suggests someone has returned. If not you, then who?" Jacques offered no answer, his silence a wall Poirot could not yet breach. The detective thanked him and withdrew, his mind turning to the passage's implications. The tunnel offered a path to the library, bypassing locked doors and stormy grounds, but its dryness puzzled him. The murderer had struck during the tempest. How had they entered without trace? Poirot next examined the library's hidden entrance more closely. The panel's mechanism was well oiled, its hinges silent, suggesting recent use or maintenance. He traced the bookcase's edge, finding a faint scratch where the panel met the floor, as if opened hurriedly. A single thread, gray and coarse, caught on a splinter, unlike Claire's blue smock, but reminiscent of the aprons Hélène wore. Poirot tucked it into an envelope, his gray cells humming. "The passage is a key," he mused, but to whose hand? He sought Hélène in the kitchen, where she was scrubbing pots with a vigor that bordered on ferocity. "Madame Marchand," he said, his tone courteous, "you spoke of smugglers' tales. Did you ever explore these passages yourself?" Hélène's hands stilled, her eyes sharp as she met his gaze. "Once or twice, years ago, when I first came here. They're damp, filthy places. I had no reason to go back." Her voice was firm, but Poirot noted a faint flush on her cheeks, a crack in her composure. "And yet," he said, "someone has. A thread, perhaps from an apron, was found near the library's hidden door. Curious, no?" Hélène's lips thinned. "Servants wear aprons, monsieur. So do cooks and maids. You'd do better to look at those with real grudges." Her deflection was swift, but Poirot sensed a guardedness that warranted further scrutiny. As noon approached, Poirot stood on the cliffs, the sea's restless churn mirroring his thoughts. The passage was a revelation, but it raised more questions than answers. The footprint pointed to Jacques, yet its dryness suggested it predated the storm. The thread implicated Hélène, but its commonality weakened its weight. The murderer had used the passage, Poirot was certain, but their method remained elusive. Had they entered before the storm, waiting in the shadows? Or was the passage a misdirection, like the vermilion paint? He returned to the chateau, his resolve firm. The household's motives, Claire's stifled dreams, Roland's financial strain, Hélène's resentment, Jacques' inherited anger, were threads in a tapestry, but the passage was the loom. Poirot's gray cells worked tirelessly, weaving connections. "The truth," he murmured, gazing at the chateau's looming silhouette, "hides in the shadows, but it cannot hide forever." Chapter 5. The Artist's Mask. The Chateau des Vagues stood sentinel against the Brittany coast, its turrets catching the pale afternoon light as if reluctant to reveal their secrets. Hercule Poirot, his small frame wrapped in a neatly pressed coat, paced the gravel path outside, his mind as sharp as the sea air. The hidden passage, with its solitary footprint and coarse thread, had deepened the mystery of Madame Héloise Fournier's murder, but it was the vermilion smudge on the library table that now held his attention. The paint, so vivid and deliberate, pointed to Claire Dubois, the artist whose passion for stormy seascapes seemed to mirror the tempest of the crime. Yet Poirot, ever cautious of the obvious, suspected a deeper artifice. "The mask of innocence," he murmured, his mustache quivering, "is often painted with the boldest colors." He ascended to Claire's attic studio, a sanctuary of chaos where canvases leaned against walls and the scent of linseed oil hung heavy. Claire stood before an easel, her auburn curls pinned loosely, her smock flecked with vermilion and ultramarine. The canvas before her depicted a churning sea, its hues vivid yet unfinished, the paint glistening wetly. She turned at Poirot's entrance, her eyes wary but bright. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, setting down her brush, "have you found who killed my aunt?" "Not yet, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, his voice soft but probing. "But the truth, it reveals itself in layers, like your paintings." He gestured to the canvas. "This work, you painted it during the storm, oui?" Claire nodded, her fingers brushing a paint-stained sleeve. "The storm was inspiring. I worked late, lost in it. I didn't hear her scream until I came downstairs for tea." Her voice trembled, but her gaze held steady, a blend of grief and defiance that Poirot noted with interest. He stepped closer, examining her hands. They were speckled with vermilion, the same shade as the smudge in the library, but the paint was dry, crusted into her cuticles. "Your palette, mademoiselle, is distinctive, vermilion, a bold choice. It was found near the dagger, you know." He watched her closely, his green eyes unblinking. Claire's breath caught, her hands clenching. "I didn't touch that dagger, monsieur. I was here, painting. Ask the servants. The floorboards creak like thunder. Someone would have heard me leave." Her voice rose, a note of panic threading through it. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "The floorboards, yes, I have tested them." He paced the studio, his steps deliberate, the boards groaning underfoot. A maid had confirmed no such sound during the murder's hour, supporting Claire's alibi. Yet the blue fabric near the cliffs, matching her smock, nagged at his mind. "Tell me, mademoiselle," he said, pausing by a stack of canvases. "Do you ever walk the grounds for inspiration? Near the cliffs, perhaps?" Claire hesitated, her eyes flickering. "Sometimes. The sea's moods are strongest there, but not that night. The storm was too fierce." Her words were quick, almost rehearsed, and Poirot's gray cells stirred. Was she concealing a venture to the cliffs, or was the fabric another misdirection? He thanked her and descended to the library, where Inspector Giraud was cataloguing evidence with his usual blunt efficiency. Poirot requested an analysis of the vermilion smudge, suspecting its composition held a key. While waiting, he examined the hidden passage's entrance again, the coarse thread still tucked in his envelope. Its gray hue, common to servants' aprons, pointed to Hélène Marchand, whose sharp tongue and long service masked a simmering resentment. Yet the passage's dry floor continued to puzzle him. The murderer had struck during the storm. How had they navigated the tunnel without leaving a trace of rain? Poirot sought out Hélène in the pantry, where she was arranging china with a precision that bordered on obsession. "Madame Marchand," he said, his tone courteous. "You are meticulous in your duties. The studio, too, you clean it, oui? You handle Mademoiselle Claire's paints?" Hélène's eyes narrowed, her hands pausing. "I tidy the studio, yes. It's a mess, always. But I don't touch her paints. Filthy stuff. Stains everything." Her voice was sharp, but Poirot detected a defensive edge, as if she anticipated his next question. "And the passage," he continued. "You knew of it. Did you ever share its existence with others? Mademoiselle Claire, perhaps?" He watched her closely, noting the faint tightening of her jaw. "Never," Hélène snapped. "It's a dirty old tunnel, no place for a lady like her. You're barking up the wrong tree, monsieur." Her dismissal was firm, but Poirot sensed a guardedness that warranted further scrutiny. The analysis of the vermilion smudge arrived by late afternoon, delivered by a harried constable. The paint matched Claire's palette, but its consistency was telling. Mixed with linseed oil, it was freshly applied, not dried as it would be on an artist's hands after hours of work. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Aha," he said softly. "The paint is not a trace of guilt, but a brushstroke of deception. Someone had placed it in the library, intending to implicate Claire. Hélène, with access to the studio, was a likely candidate, but so was anyone who could slip upstairs unnoticed." Poirot returned to the cliffs, the sea's restless churn a mirror to his thoughts. The blue fabric, the vermilion smudge, the dry footprint in the passage, all were pieces of a deliberate design. Claire's alibi held, yet her proximity to the clues kept her in focus. Hélène's knowledge of the chateau's secrets made her a shadow in the puzzle, while Jacques' footprint and Roland's reticence lingered as possibilities. "The artist's mask," Poirot mused, gazing at the horizon, "conceals not only the face, but the hand that paints the lie." He resolved to test one final detail: the timing of the scream. Claire claimed she heard it while fetching tea, but the servants' accounts varied slightly. One recalled seeing her in the hall moments before, not after. A small discrepancy, but to Poirot it was a crack in the canvas. He would press further, delicately, to uncover the truth beneath the surface. The chateau's secrets were unraveling, and Hercule Poirot, with his unerring method, was determined to strip away the final layers of deceit. Chapter 6. The Solicitor's Secret. The Château des Vagues seemed to hold its breath as the afternoon waned, its ancient walls steeped in the silence that follows a storm. Hercule Poirot, his compact figure moving with purposeful grace, traversed the chateau's corridors, his mind a crucible of deduction. The vermilion smudge, revealed as a deliberate plant, had shifted his focus from Claire Dubois to the broader web of deceit spun within the household. The hidden passage, the coarse thread, and the dry footprint were threads in a tapestry. But Poirot now turned his attention to Roland Berger, the solicitor whose guarded demeanor and financial oversight hinted at secrets yet uncovered. "The man who counts the coins," Poirot murmured, his mustache twitching, "often knows more than he reveals." He found Roland in the study, a room cluttered with ledgers and legal documents, its air heavy with the scent of ink and old paper. Roland sat at a mahogany desk, his wire-rimmed spectacles glinting as he scribbled notes, his thin frame hunched as if shielding his work from prying eyes. At Poirot's entrance, he looked up, his expression a blend of irritation and wariness. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice clipped, "I am busy. The estate's affairs do not pause for tragedy." "Précisément," Poirot replied, settling into a chair with deliberate ease. "And it is those affairs that interest me. Madame Fournier's estate. It is vast, oui? Investments, properties, trusts, all under your careful stewardship." His tone was courteous, but his green eyes were sharp, probing for cracks in Roland's composure. Roland adjusted his spectacles, his fingers betraying a slight tremor. "The estate is complex, as I said before. I managed it to her satisfaction." His words were measured, but Poirot detected a strain, like a violin string stretched too tight. "And yet," Poirot continued, his voice soft as velvet, "complexity invites irregularities. Tell me, Monsieur Berger, were there any such irregularities in Madame Fournier's accounts?" He leaned forward, his gaze unyielding. Roland's face paled, his hands stilling on the desk. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the distant murmur of the sea. Then, with a sigh, he slumped back, his defenses crumbling. "Very well, monsieur. There were discrepancies. Small sums redirected to a charitable trust. Madame Fournier was unaware, but I intended to repay them. She was about to review the accounts herself. She suspected something." His voice cracked, and he removed his spectacles, rubbing his eyes. "I begged her for time, but I swear, I did not kill her." Poirot's expression remained impassive, though his gray cells were alight. "A confession of theft, monsieur, but not of murder. Yet the timing is curious, non? A woman dies just as her solicitor's misdeeds risk exposure." He rose, pacing the room, his steps precise. "Your alibi, it is supported by the maid who saw you at your desk. But tell me, did you handle Mademoiselle Claire's paints, perhaps in passing through the studio?" Roland blinked, startled. "Paints? No, I avoid that attic. It's a mess, and I have no business there." His denial was swift, but Poirot noted the genuine confusion in his eyes. Roland was no artist, nor likely to plant vermilion as a clue. Leaving the study, Poirot sought confirmation of Roland's alibi. The maid, a timid girl named Marie, confirmed seeing him through the study's open door during the storm, his lamp burning steadily. His slight build, too, made him an unlikely candidate for the forceful thrust of the dagger. Yet his financial misdeeds added a new layer to the puzzle. A motive, perhaps, but not the means. Poirot's thoughts returned to the vermilion smudge, its fresh linseed oil suggesting a calculated act. Hélène Marchand, with her access to Claire's studio and knowledge of the chateau's rhythms, remained a shadow in his calculations. He descended to the kitchen, where Hélène was kneading dough with a vigor that seemed to channel her frustrations. "Madame Marchand," Poirot said, his tone disarming. "You are the heart of this household, are you not? You see all, know all. Tell me, did you ever notice Monsieur Berger in the studio, perhaps tampering with Mademoiselle Claire's supplies?" Hélène's hands paused, her eyes flashing. "Berger? He's too prissy to touch paint, sticks to his papers and his schemes." Her voice dripped with disdain, and Poirot noted the venom reserved for Roland, a personal grudge, perhaps beyond her general resentment of Madame Fournier. "And the passage," Poirot pressed. "You cleaned its entrance years ago, you said. Did you share its existence with Monsieur Berger?" He watched her closely, noting the slight stiffening of her shoulders. "No," she said sharply. "He's no smuggler, nor am I. That tunnel's a relic, nothing more." Her denial was firm, but Poirot sensed a guardedness, a reluctance to linger on the topic. Retreating to the terrace, Poirot gazed at the sea, its surface now deceptively calm. The puzzle was taking shape. Roland's embezzlement provided a motive, but his alibi and physique weakened his candidacy as the murderer. The vermilion smudge, planted to implicate Claire, pointed to someone with access to her studio. Hélène, most likely, or perhaps an unseen hand. The passage's dry footprint, likely Jacques's, suggested exploration before the storm, not during. Poirot's mind turned to the scream's timing, the discrepancy in Claire's account nagging at him. A servant had seen her in the hall moments before. The scream, not after, as she claimed. Was it a slip or a deliberate lie? He requested Inspector Giraud's assistance in examining the library's hidden panel for fingerprints, suspecting the murderer had used it with care. The results, delivered by dusk, were telling. No prints, not even smudges, as if the panel had been wiped clean. A meticulous mind, Poirot mused, or one familiar with deception. Hélène's role as housekeeper gave her the means to clean such traces, but her motive, years of servitude under Madame Fournier's exacting rule, required further exploration. As night fell, Poirot stood alone in the library, the chandelier casting long shadows. The solicitor's secret had illuminated one corner of the mystery, but the heart of the crime remained elusive. "The truth," he whispered, his eyes on the empty dagger case, "is a ledger of motives, balanced by method, and Hercule Poirot shall balance it." Chapter 7. The Storm's Revelation. The Château des Vagues stood resolute against the Brittany dusk, its turrets piercing a sky now clear of the storm's wrath. Hercule Poirot, his small figure silhouetted against the fading light, gathered the household in the library, where Madame Héloise Fournier had met her end. The room, though cleansed of blood, seemed to hold the echo of her final scream, its walls a silent witness to treachery. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his green eyes scanning the faces before him. Claire Dubois, her auburn curls framing a face taut with anticipation. Roland Berger, his spectacles glinting with unease. Hélène Marchand, her sharp features set in defiance. And Jacques Leroux, his brooding presence a shadow in the corner. The chandelier's light cast their expressions into stark relief, and Poirot, with the precision of a conductor, prepared to unravel the symphony of deceit. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and measured, A murder has been committed in this room, not by chance, but by a mind of cold calculation. The locked door, the jeweled dagger, the vermilion smudge, all were strokes in a masterpiece of misdirection. But Hercule Poirot sees through the canvas to the truth beneath. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle, his mustache twitching as he observed their reactions. He turned to the hidden passage, its entrance now revealed behind the bookcase. "This tunnel," he said, gesturing to the panel, "was the key to the crime, a path unseen by the storm's chaos. A footprint, broad and deep, was found within. Yours, Monsieur Leroux." Jacques stiffened, his fists clenching, but Poirot raised a hand. "Yet the footprint was dry, made before the storm, not during. You explored the passage, perhaps out of curiosity or old grudges, but you did not use it to kill." Jacques' shoulders relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained wary. Poirot continued, his gaze shifting to Claire. "Mademoiselle Dubois, the vermilion smudge in this room pointed to you, a painter of storms, but the paint was fresh, mixed with linseed oil, applied not by an artist's hand, but by one seeking to cast suspicion." Claire's breath caught, her hands twisting her shawl, but Poirot's eyes moved to Roland. "Monsieur Berger, your financial indiscretions gave you motive, but your alibi holds, and your slight frame could not wield the dagger with such force." Roland adjusted his spectacles, his relief palpable, but Poirot's attention settled on Hélène Marchand. "Madame Marchand," he said, his voice soft yet unyielding. "You are the heart of this château, its keeper of routines and secrets. You knew the hidden passage, having cleaned its entrance years ago. You had access to Mademoiselle Claire's studio, where the vermilion paint was taken. And you, alone, had the opportunity to move unseen during the storm." Hélène's face drained of color, her hands gripping the edge of a chair. "You accuse me, monsieur? I was polishing silver, doing my duty." Her voice was sharp, but a tremor betrayed her. Poirot stepped closer, his eyes like twin lanterns. "Your duty, oui, but also your burden. For years you served Madame Fournier, enduring her demands, her criticisms. Your resentment grew, a silent storm within you. On the night of the murder, you used the passage, entering the library before the rain began, knowing Madame Fournier often read there late. You took the dagger from its case, struck her down, and locked the door with a spare key you kept as housekeeper. The vermilion smudge you planted to implicate Mademoiselle Claire, whose inheritance threatened your control over this house." Hélène's lips parted, but no words came. Poirot pressed on, his voice relentless. "The passage's dry floor puzzled me, but you entered before the storm's peak, waiting in the shadows. The scream, heard by Mademoiselle Claire, was not Madame Fournier's, but your own, a final touch to draw the household's attention. The maid saw Mademoiselle Claire in the hall moments before, not after, because you timed your cry to confuse the sequence." A gasp escaped Claire, her eyes wide. Hélène's composure shattered, her voice rising in a desperate wail. "She was a tyrant, always ordering, never thanking. I gave my life to this place, and she treated me like dirt. I couldn't bear it any longer." Her confession spilled forth, a torrent of rage and regret, as she sank to her knees. Inspector Giraud, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward, his earlier bluster replaced by grudging respect. "Well, Monsieur Poirot," he said, cuffing Hélène, "you've outdone yourself. I'd have chased thieves all the way to Brest." He led Hélène away, her defiance crumbling into sobs. The household dispersed, their faces etched with shock and relief. Claire approached Poirot, her voice soft. "Thank you, monsieur. I feared I'd be blamed." Poirot inclined his head, his expression gentle. "The truth, mademoiselle, is a light that clears all shadows. Your art, it will now breathe freely." As the room emptied, Poirot stood alone, gazing at the sea through the library's window. The storm had revealed its secrets, not in its fury, but in the quiet that followed. "Order and method," he murmured. "Triumph over chaos, always." The chateau, freed from its burden, seemed to sigh, and Poirot, satisfied, turned to the night, ready for the final chapter of his stay. Chapter 8. The Quiet Tide. The Chateau de Vague stood bathed in the soft light of a Brittany morning, its stone facade softened by the gentle lapping of the sea against the cliffs below. The storm that had cloaked Madame Héloise Fournier's murder was now a memory, its fury replaced by a tranquil tide that seemed to wash the chateau clean of its shadows. Hercule Poirot, his suitcase packed with the precision of a military campaign, stood on the terrace, his small figure immaculate in a tailored overcoat. His mustache, perfectly waxed, gleamed in the sunlight, and his green eyes surveyed the horizon with a quiet satisfaction. The mystery was solved, the murderer unmasked, yet Poirot lingered, as was his custom, to reflect on the human frailties that had woven this tragedy. The household, though subdued, was beginning to stir with the tentative rhythm of renewal. Claire Dubois, freed from the specter of suspicion, had returned to her attic studio, her brush moving with a new lightness. Poirot had glimpsed her latest canvas, a seascape not of storms, but of dawn, its hues soft and hopeful. "Mademoiselle," he had said to her earlier, "your art will now sing of freedom, not constraint." Claire's grateful smile had been answer enough. Roland Berger, the solicitor, faced a different fate. His confession of embezzlement, though unrelated to the murder, had drawn Inspector Giraud's scrutiny. As Poirot passed the study, he saw Roland packing his ledgers, his face drawn with the weight of impending legal consequences. "Monsieur Berger," Poirot remarked, pausing at the door, "honesty, even belated, is a step toward redemption." Roland's nod was curt, his eyes averted, but Poirot sensed a flicker of resolve in the man's posture. A chance, perhaps, to rebuild. Jacques Leroux, the groundskeeper, was preparing to leave Saint-Malo. Poirot found him near the stables, loading a cart with his few belongings. The young man's brooding air had lifted slightly, though his dark eyes still carried the scars of old wounds. "Monsieur Poirot," Jacques said, his voice gruff, "you cleared my name. I won't forget that." Poirot inclined his head. "The past, Monsieur Leroux, is a heavy burden. Lay it down and walk forward." Jacques' faint smile suggested he might try. Hélène Marchand, now in custody, awaited trial in Brest. Her confession, wrung from years of suppressed rage, had shocked the household, yet Poirot felt no triumph in her downfall. The heart, he mused, when pressed too long, becomes a storm of its own. Her crime, born of resentment against Madame Fournier's tyranny, was a stark reminder of the cost of cruelty, however unwitting. As Poirot's hired car wound down the coastal road, the chateau receded into the distance, its turrets a fading silhouette against the sky. He leaned back, his hands folded neatly, his mind replaying the case's intricacies. The locked door, the hidden passage, the vermilion smudge, the dry footprint. Each clue had been a note in a discordant melody, resolved only by the harmony of his gray cells. The scream, timed to mislead, and the spare key, wielded by a housekeeper who knew every crevice of the chateau, had been the final chords of truth. The sea stretched endless to his left, its surface a mirror of calm. Poirot tipped his hat to it, a gesture of farewell. "Adieu, mon ami," he murmured. "You rage and you whisper, but you always yield to reason." The driver, a taciturn Breton, glanced back, puzzled, but Poirot merely smiled. The world, with its tempests and treacheries, was no match for order and method. In Saint-Malo, he would board a train to Paris, then London, where new mysteries doubtless awaited. But for now, Hercule Poirot allowed himself a moment of repose, content that the Chateau des Vagues was at peace, its secrets laid bare. "Until the next puzzle," he whispered, his eyes bright with anticipation, as the car carried him toward the horizon.